I'll give you a brief summary, then we can decide what we're going to do with this session. So, one, this session got put forward out of a conversation Mark and I were having, which is that sort of ongoing objective of mine, really, which is all about making the awareness of design and increasing the quality of design in not just our ecosystem, but beyond that, making sure that not just our platform, but the apps that land in the platform have a better user experience. So if people open a Sudoku game, they should be able to play Sudoku without any effort or thought involved. But parallel to that, people have suggested sessions like the reinvigorating the artwork community. Because one of the things that's changed with Canonical having a formal design team is that design disciplines and skills have become more, it's been, the specialisms within it have become more obvious. So, somebody who produces a wallpaper isn't necessarily the person who will do you a piece of interaction design. So, and historically we've had an artwork wiki, there's a couple of different mailing lists, and none of these things quite do what we need them to do if we're going to have a vibrant design community, which includes art workers, interaction designers, and all those other little things. So one of the sessions we had yesterday identified how do we, how would we actually measure the success of the cycle in terms of the design community within Ubuntu for starters. So we talked about being able to actually publicize a set of tasks, making it easier to connect a willing person with a piece of work, and so that people actually had things that they could work on. And then separate to that came out a conversation about the fact that the tools we have now just don't support what we need to do. A wiki is very difficult. You're going to submit loads and loads of images, for example, as a competition. It just doesn't support that kind of behaviour very well. So the last session we had, we sort of set up a design process for ourselves as a design community to come up with a better set of tools. So we were going to start with a piece of research, a questionnaire survey into what people are doing now, what they want to do in the future. Then we would move on to sort of analysis, and we'd actually do it as an example of design in the open, but following a proper design thinking process. And we would know if we'd have succeeded and failed by the fact that we have to launch this new web presence, whatever it might be, by next year. So on the back of that, I don't know, and then just now, by some coincidence, I was having a corridor conversation about the fact that Launchpad needs a new edit icon. Charlene did some usability testing on icons in general in Launchpad, because we have something Charlene likes to call the iconometer, which is basically a survey tool that helps gather feedback on icons. And that particular icon, we need a new icon. Can we just package that up as one of those first tasks, so we get submissions, mail it out to the artwork list, and just get something going.
Speaking as the artist of the old icon, yes, please.
And then, sorry, I can't talk without waving my hands around and writing. My apologies. Is there anyone online seeing? Oh, there's a camera. Hello. So there's kind of a process and tools thing that we've already talked about. There's the reasons for being. And then there's also things like the fact that we already run programs like the Paper Cuts program, which is actually a very effective tool and focuses solely on paper cuts in upstreams. It's not something that spends much time fixing things in the platform. It's all about the apps. We spend a lot of time working on Empathy, Quiver, Nautilus. So I don't know given the title of this session, which is one of those things that got put in and never got killed. What shall we do? What would we like to talk about? What's a useful?
What tasks do we think that it's possible to set up for this cycle when it comes to open source design?
Okay, we could listen to us. I've just been reminded of something else that I think we should talk about. Do we have a session specifically about UX advocates?
I don't think we do.
Okay. Because one of the things that's So we started quite, unfortunately, Sean, nobody is in this session who's actually worked on mentoring that program. But we had a session, we had a sort of a drive which was about connecting user experience architects who were willing to do some work with projects that needed somebody on their team who could help guide the user experience and design decisions. And I think that's kind of in its infancy, so I'm not sure how far we got with that. So part of the reason for the tasks existing is that there's currently no real bulletin board style thing where you can connect people to jobs. So given all that options, we're still sticking with tasks. Some possible tasks. Because we could also just go and sit in the sun.
Yay.
If we have nothing that we think needs to happen this cycle, then I'm happy to.
I would like to use the Launchpad example because it's something we could get done quite quickly. It's a single icon. We could probably draft out what the problems are with the current one based on the findings very easily, what it needs to actually say. It's an edit icon. And get that. There's no particular style guides that I know of. So we just need a better, clear icon. I think that there needs to be should we just come up with a process for doing that now? Get that done as our job number one? Get it out there? Yeah? So
we could run that as an experiment to see how this sort of thing would work.
Yeah. So we could go for just flew in my face. Brief by the end of we just need a one page, like a brief description, put it on the artwork list. We could do that tomorrow. And then, is anybody probably documenting or anything useful? Or shall I just right here? Okay, so brief by tomorrow. Icon brief by Wednesday. So where are we going to collect contributions? That's the biggest. But I suppose with icons there'll be small files.
Imagebit.ca.
What could we use? What's the easiest place for people to dump pictures?
Flickr, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
No.
there's some people,
No.
There is a website that we can use. Let me try and remember. Has anybody heard of PicPic?
I don't know. I just want to make a decision now where we're going to put it. I have no suggestions. So I'm not very used to this conversation.
I'm suggesting PicPic. They have an ability to set up a project and post multiple items to it.
What's it called?
PICK. It's something that the Debian community have looked into.
Okay, we'll try that. PicPic for contributions, publicise. Is there any kind of voting or liking mechanism on PicPic?
I'm looking at it now.
Just curious. We obviously it on.
You want to be able to say, I like that one.
Maybe.
Give me a second to have a look at it.
Okay, have a look at it. So, and then we just need is 2 weeks long enough for a project like this?
I think it is.
I think so.
Yeah, at least as long as we have a clear deadline for when we expect decisions to be made.
2 week deadline. Well, so yeah. 2 week deadline for the winner announced, or is it your last submission? Or choice, time, whatever. Do we give
Last submission.
last
Yeah.
submission? So let's say that's a Friday, winner announced 3 days later or something.
Yes.
We'll look at a calendar. Somebody will look at a calendar. We also mentioned that Launchpad artwork is copyright covered.
It is.
So what happens with that?
The license terms is free for development. That's the license. Free for development purposes only.
Right. So
the terms and conditions of the artwork, all the artwork, is probably not acceptable for the community.
So we have to put, we'll just...
It either has to be a copyright statement
I understand. That's why I've been collecting bugs for more than a year.
So I wonder if we just, we've got to try it. So I think we're explicit up front, because that, I believe it just means that you have to sign a contributor agreement. Or something.
No, not in this case. The
Oh.
artwork has always been listed as separate. But as my point I'm arguing is, this is the same icon used on multiple sites. The fix, we should choose an edit icon and use it consistently everywhere. So that's what I think the terms it should be under. I don't know what those terms are.
Public domain.
What?
Creative
Okay.
Commons.
Okay,
I would
somebody...
assume Creative Commons, but Ubuntu 1 uses it. I don't know what other sites are. I haven't tracked down every site who does it.
Ian, can you check out the T's and C's?
For
For
contributions to Launchpad?
because it would be an icon that goes on Ubuntu 1 and everywhere else. Can you check out under what terms people would be contributing something?
Yeah.
So that we don't set out, make it sound like we need to, in the brief, we need to say exactly what the terms are,
Yeah.
so that then if people want to contribute, they can, and if they don't want to, then they have to.
Yeah. Whilst I'm looking at that, someone asked to pick up Gobby because it died just at the point I made the document. So if it's, the server will probably come back up at some point fairly soon, and then you start editing the page and adding those notes.
Yeah, I think we just put this under experiment terms to see what happens. Because if it, just don't know what we're going to have to. Matthew, are you going to say something?
No, sorry.
You just look like it.
I understand that for Launchpad the code is under a contributor's agreement.
GPL,
AGPL. I'm very familiar with the GPL, but is there a requirement for graphics, especially small items like this, because we'd like to be able to use them on the websites, non-core websites like
That will-
local directory.
I think there has to be some history there. I do know that this was an intentional attempt to make sure the brand of the Launchpad is not reused if it is deployed elsewhere. But I don't know the full history of all the icons to even say that because it's clear they're being used on the Launchpad. I mean, other canonical sites. I think some may even be back on other sites that I don't even know are canonical or Ubuntu. That's what I'm trying to find out.
Right, if you do find these icons on Ubuntu site, let us know and we'll take them down or replace them.
Well, if they predate canonical, then I think. See, that's what I don't know.
Oh, I see. You don't know whether.
Maybe you can answer this question, Mark. So we're looking at a first task to start reinvigorating the Ubuntu artwork community. So one thing is the edit icon in Launchpad tests badly everywhere. So it's a very self-contained thing that we can look at. We were just going to set it up as a 2-week project, see what we get. We're unclear of the term, because we know it gets used in Ubuntu 1 as well, and we're unclear on the terms under which that contribution will be received. Is there anything we would need to put in the announcement to make people aware of?
Well, we could certainly invite people to design us an icon and then use it. The only thing I would say is we're about to go through an icon design thing for the desktop.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to at least be asking the question of what our web portfolio of iconography looks like.
So I'm aware of that, but I just wondered if we could just... So we were just looking, and I've already discussed that, but I just wondered if it's something we could... Are there any copyright issues that we need to tell people about before they give their contribution that will upset them later?
Our contribution agreement covers anything like that, so if they've signed that, then it's really not an issue. And it may be less of an issue for folks around after. The flip side is we may not even require it for
more than a month, but it may be, given, I understand that its shelf life might be very short term, but we need to find a process to get these kind of contributions moving through. It's a very obvious.
For now, I would just ask folks to sign the contribution agreement, and then we don't have to worry about it.
Cool. So that answers that. So if it's all covered by the contributor agreement, then we're good.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be our first little attempt. Yeah.
I'm happy.
That's it. Let's get some
In
sun.
other news, we've had 3 sessions on this today, and we think we've exhausted all the topics. So, unless anyone has anything specific that needs to be discussed further here today.
So you've comprehensively and sort of completely answered the question, what are the reasons for being? In which case,
We did
arrange
this
a plenary for
yesterday.
you tomorrow and just get us all going.
We just commented on the fact that this session went in, but then separately we had a reinvigorating the artwork community and the comms session. So yesterday we sort of set ourselves a mission statement. Today we set ourselves a project for redesigning the reinvigorating, and so we need to actually do some work before we can talk much more, I think.
So I mean, if you ask if I was to say to you, what are we going to do that will really raise the profile of design in open source and give some teeth to that in terms of identifying competence, promoting practices, tools, patterns, and so on? Do we have an answer to that question?
So, well, the thing that we discussed in the last session was the fact that we've got Ubuntu artwork community, we've got Ayatana, we've got people who just read the blog but don't go on either of the mailing list. So one of our first tasks is to work out who we have in our common community, what they do or don't do, and who we might want to have. So we're actually going to follow an open design process that demonstrates our design approach. So it will have a research analysis, sketch and iterate and deliver process, which will be about creating the umbrella for our tools. So do we need a wiki anymore? What is it that we have? So, and in doing that...
I'm not sure that that's going to answer the question that I asked though. Like,
right now, we don't have a good portal for inviting contributions or design conversations. We've got various properties,
separate channels.
various separate channels, and there's people don't get connected into the things that they can contribute to. So that was basically the focus of the conversation yesterday, is that people come along, they may or may not be interested, they may or may not have something worthwhile to offer or learn, or there's no way of saying, express, no path, no good flow to take somebody from expressing an interest to being useful.
Right, I mean, so one of the problems we have is that we have no filter on who everybody has to listen to in that forum, or in any of those forums, frankly. I mean, so if I think of like articulating a destination where a good place to get to would be where projects can meet and build relationships with good designers who will follow consistent practices and use open tools to help them get a better result. And, but we don't even have the first parts of that. I mean, what we have is a place where a bunch of people show up and mill around.
So one of our KPIs today, we did this reasons for being as a mission statement included. So how will we know we've been successful in this cycle? And one of the measures was that we actually had tasks we can point at that got delivered. And so that's one of the things that we have to look at in this cycle, which is, because it's not just about
Right, but are those
things,
Ubuntu specific tasks, or are they more
no,
general?
not necessarily.
Okay.
So
I think
because it's
bigger
very
than us.
important that we can express tasks that if people want to contribute specifically to Ubuntu, things can go in there. But also, if Banshee needs a new mock-up for something, that we can demonstrate that we've at least connected people, if not created a mechanism where they can pull their tasks into this thing, so that there's like that might not be where what we land on as being the first thing that we can do.
Yeah.
That's why we're picking this as a quick thing.
We need to kind of get people to the point where they can show up and have a conversation with someone. We need to start doing some separation between the folks who've just arrived and the folks who've been around a long time but still haven't moderated or modulated what they're saying, and the folks who we would be confident having communities partner with. And the flip side is also true though, and that is that we shouldn't be a bottleneck. So if a community happens to find and meet a designer and build a relationship with that designer, even if we don't know or like the designer, but they're happy and it's producing good results, then we should celebrate that as well. You know what I mean?
Yes, because it's not just about upstream projects, it's also within our own community. We have local teams who need stuff designed and nobody to design it for them. And no set starting point to go, I need something designed, where do I go?
Right.
We just don't have that sorted out. So even in its simplest form, if between now, in this cycle we just put our own house in order, we're on the way.
That's true.
Because there's lots of people who want to do things, and there's very straightforward tasks out there that just don't get done because nobody knows they need to get done.
So one measure of success is the Austrian loco team is able to get a design review or a design done of a flyer for an event.
Yeah.
And there's a fairly obvious pattern that they would follow to get that done. And we'd be fairly confident that that might get done.
Yeah. So that's what we were looking at yesterday, so how do we make sure that we can cover our stuff, people's willingness, how do we connect the willingness to contribute, stuff that we do, stuff that the community needs, and then generally, okay, you like designing icons, or logos, there's only so many we need, but there's a bunch of apps out there that need new logos, go help them. So we get all those levels.
What are our prospects for creating a forum which brings in people who don't primarily think of themselves as free software people?
That's going to be dependent, well, the font will have a big impact on that, because we'll get coverage in places that we don't normally.
Well, we don't really, so we're going to start get that coverage now, and we don't really have a place for those people to go to.
I think once you have a web presence where you have a running design process and a showcase, that you have a chance to attract designers that way.
Quick fix. Now, to point people at the artwork wiki is not a happy place.
You awesome.
Yes.
Is it you that does the poetry? Is it you that writes poetry?
Poetry? No.
Okay. Photos.
I am the one who painted you on a cat. Cat.
Ah, that's right. That was a kind of poetry.
So new people coming in. So there's that, but then that's part of that will be competitions and putting a design briefs out. Because that's another thing that we talked about yesterday. There's tasks and then there's design briefs. These are things we need answers on the postcard. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't know where to tell them this is on the postcard. So we've, in the last session, planned out in 2-week sprints. 2.5 month process to get us to a web presence. It's super fast.
Yeah. Which hopefully means we'll have something in time for around the time Bruno's thing font starts, and then some external people, and then they've got a house to point them out, and that's how you start bringing external people into his exhibition.
Okay.
Is there any sense, do you get consistent contributions from individual designers, or do they have a tendency to kind of make contributions for one need and then kind of fade away when it comes to design? I wonder, because when looking at some other contests or competitions, design side, I feel like there's a backlash by some designers that it's spec work, and they're just trying to get
Get work done for free.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a strong ethos amongst professional designers that you don't do spec work. And in other words, they don't do work where you might get paid for it and might not, or where you won't get paid for it. And so I think we need to make this clear distinction. Which says is that ethos is perfectly fine, but open source is a separate thing. Open source, you are contributing to the greater.
Well, there's also the fact you cannot underestimate the number of people who currently install Ubuntu desktop. So, even though the sound theme competition, as it were, hasn't really, we sort of quietly kicked that off in the last cycle. But one of the contributions I got was from somebody who's written the idents for RTE, which is Ireland's national radio, and for a Sky TV ad. Because being the person that writes the equivalent to the Nokia ringtone or the Windows startup sound, that is a massive, massive thing. We are not a tiny little project that's, you're not designing your town's community newspaper here. You're designing something that millions and millions of people will see. And that's very different from spec work.
But
It's not what you can do as a portfolio.
It's a portfolio enhancement. I mean, Machine tripped over himself. So I was like, right, well, I missed the deadline, can't do anything. Wasn't it? It's this for somebody. So there'll be people who don't want to do things like that, and they don't have to. But there will be people who recognise the portfolio building aspect of it.
Absolutely. But to target people who are looking, I mean, if it's a recognition thing, that's more of a once-off than trying to cultivate someone on an ongoing basis.
Right. I mean, I think for the broader community, we have to get to the point where folks, designers who are interested in participating on the same basic contractual terms as the terms that open source developers themselves participate in, which is you show up, you'll negotiate and debate your ideas, and maybe something will get done that you'll be proud of, and you won't get paid. But at the moment, if they show up, they're treated rudely. There's no sort of support for the tools that they're familiar with using.
There's no means of earning merit in this meritocracy as a designer at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a big
Well,
problem.
like showcasing, I mean, there are definitely the showcases where having your work in there are definitely is something that someone can not only be proud of, but is almost like their own portfolio work.
But why does a developer contribute? Designers are gift givers too.
Absolutely.
It's not a certain kind of person. Not every developer contributes free software.
I think
that's critical to remember.
I think you have a list of rationalities why developers contribute. It's not just one, it's like there's a whole bunch of them.
Some people are sure, some people just like being
Education.
nice, some people want to learn, some people think they're going to get a job out of it, some whatever. But
I've seen a lot in the creative, some of the Creative Commons competitions for like video for a certain purpose. It seems that they target a lot of academic. So they almost like when they explain the project or what the competition is all about, they're going to universities and suggesting that competition or contributors could possibly even be, people working in class or something like that. And even, I don't know if anybody saw that when Gap put out the horrible logo, and then it got pulled because of feedback on Facebook. And then there were just sites of alternatives, and a lot of them came from universities. So in terms of just, I think like the portal's a great idea, but targeting is like who are you targeting with it?
What was the gist of the conversation around tools?
we didn't dig into tools deeply. We're focusing on actually, we don't really know who. Vish was in the last session, he was talking about, trying to make this kind of noisy, it's not very useful. The artwork community occasionally gets, the artwork mailing list has a few, hey, I did this, does anybody want to look? and a hello, I do art, what can I do? And there's no vibrancy, so that seems like the biggest problem.
You say
So, the thing is actually not about what the code says, but I've been thinking about this, and once you think process, it leads to tools. I think our web presence is pretty much a must.
Now that we have guidelines, do you think it would be easier to at least separate between the folks who want to be part of rolling a consistent art experience that has been defined as a set of guidelines essentially across the platform, from the folks who want to be, effectively designing the new set of guidelines? Because I think we had both of those showing up in the artwork group, and we had a lot more of the people who said, here's a brand new wallpaper that I think is brilliant. We now have a much more rigorous structure to test any contribution against, to be able to say, is this consistent with our guidelines?
Sorry, Sladen. Sorry, Paul. It was me clicking the pen. I'll put them down.
Where is this artwork going? Or where is it going to be?
Well, it's a mailing list called Ubuntu Artwork, and so folks come in, and historically it's been about icons and wallpapers.
Wallpapers.
It could be much more. Essentially, it's just a forum that people who are interested in artwork are able to come to. We have never really figured out how to engage with it in a really constructive way, by which I mean people there are happy and the output is useful.
Do we have an actual canonical endorsed Ubuntu account on DeviantArt, like a group?
Yeah, we have an Ubuntu artist group that I'm show you.
I think there's fantastic stuff on DeviantArt.
I should probably show that.
But
Part of the discussion here revealed that we don't have a facility for people to upload images, simply making a proposal, getting a review, getting critical feedback, and making a counter proposal.
We don't have, the weak part starts from the fact that a wiki is utterly unuseful when it comes to collecting large numbers of images and then feeding back on them. So we had a conversation that Robert Ansell was in, talking about how we use Launchpad for version control on images.
These were the submissions to the Greek Culture Showcase that we done. We also, as a side thing, we have a CC host experiment, which is live. I don't know if you know CC host. It's what Debian uses for its artwork collaborations, and it's a site where you can upload images, basically with tags, and supports SVG. And it's got, you can set licenses, and you can specify what licenses are required to submit to certain categories.
So it's like your own private DeviantArt, essentially. Private in the sense of people can't see you, private in the sense of it's your own host.
Yeah, you can control in a lot of ways what the structure is. DeviantArt has a problem when it comes to searching and verifying what licenses are. This was a bit of a pain in the ass because I had to check every submission to see if it was licensed correctly, and then go back and have a discussion with them if it wasn't. And most of the artists on DeviantArt don't understand about licensing, or they think that...
Has anybody talked to DeviantArt about adding that to their...
I've talked to some of their developers. It's not a high priority to be able to even search for certain licenses.
But SoundCloud have just started taking licenses seriously, and they've got a Creative Commons drive. So one of the point that I believe is behind your comment, which is going to places where people already are and using tools that are already out there, and places to collect stuff like Flickr and SoundCloud. SoundCloud, we got submissions from people who aren't necessarily current Ubuntu contributors or anything, they just submitted their music, and I let them submit and then go and talk to them about licensing and explain it to them. So, I don't think, and then we got contacted by SoundCloud because they were doing this Creative Commons drive of their own. So you know, in some of these things, we're just going to have to go places and make it do what we need it to do. Well,
It's a great error message.
Yeah. That looks like a...
we are in the update.
So that's the Debian one. I presume they've done other projects.
Is there, we discussed kind of a way of reviewing art, but is there a way of other than a mailing list, there is no other mechanism to collect, people specify, I need this kind of problem solved? This isn't a bug tracker problem, I don't think.
Well,
I think this is another kind of...
At the moment, we've been hijacking bug track, launch packages, things like that. And this is definitely part of our 2.5-month project to identify places to post the problem. And define, define it by whatever size you need to be defined. But no, there's no, other than bugs, there's no way of doing it, which is quite tiresome. Some things just aren't. It's fine for that, but it creates, bug is a particular kind of language.
I agree, that's why I don't think it's really appropriate. You're not contacting your designer community by entering into a bug tracker.
No. So, we don't have the answers. We got at the beginning of the session earlier in picking solutions. So, in the interest of following the proper process, we thought we should start actually finding out what we have and who we have, and then design to fix the actual problem, not the perceived problem. So yeah, that's what we sketched out. And it says if it's just about contributor agreements and multiple outcomes, we can print it tomorrow and see what happens.
I have more I've been collecting these bugs for months.
I think it would be a mistake to encourage too many contributions around icons if we're about to sit down and do a proper thing like that. Once we have guidelines.
But we might want to find the kind of people that would help us.
I can ask for that separately, but we won't get that by asking for one icon.
I think you can find
Exploring this process, separating the
Sorry?
people who want to work within the guidelines or outside. But maybe it should just be on the work level.
What I'm saying is, Launchpad has a current look and feel, and if we asked for an icon, we would get an icon in that. And if we then turn around and say, we're inventing a whole new look and feel, folks there might feel like, why did I bother? So I think we should say full disclosure. We want an icon. We want to set an icon direction. We cover Ubuntu desktop applications inside Ubuntu and Ubuntu web properties. And hey, we also need an edit icon, but that's going on. And so maybe you want to be part of that process, and here's a web shell which you can do, or maybe you just want to do this. And if these people know where they stand.
I referred to it earlier where you talked about people who want to work within the guidelines or who would rather develop their own. And say me, for example, I might want to do either. Both.
Fair enough. But I agree. People who are interested in design might well be able to play both sides of that.
If we do get someone to make an icon or the community, then I think we should make it definitely clear that this is an experiment and that we're going to be doing all the icons. We can't guarantee that it's always going to be that.
We're really experimenting with finding a process, developing a process so we can engage the community.
And that's something we need to say.
We have a similar problem with developers. Now that Ubuntu is really big, we have people who show up who think of themselves as developers who have widely divergent ideas about what that means they might do. Some would come up and say, well, of course I am a kernel. Some would come along and say, well, I'm just interested in writing my app and it's got to be on Ubuntu. Some would say, I'm interested in packaging. So we've got a big issue in terms of figuring out how to channel that talent to the right place where people will be happy. And I think this is a similar kind of problem. We need to design a starting point for all those different interests and groups.
The design hub from Fedora.
What's that?
The Fedora project's development, or had something called design hub.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I was just thinking about how there's a place that, like a place that people come and then go off to do different things.
That's part of what we discussed yesterday.
Yes.
So it's always
Was
when I
it
listen to
Mary?
Yeah, on Thursday. So, I'm just curious because the actual reason for design hub is more along the lines of the discussion and the community organisation part, not just the discussion.
Okay. So is there anything else we need to cover today? Because I feel like we've exhausted all channels that I would like to pursue today.
Well, you've only got 5 minutes anyway.
Anyone else?
One thing we started talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't say anything, you just
no.
meant.
Go on.
So one thing Madeline and I just started talking about before we came in was the possibility of a design competition. Not in the sense of contribute your icon, but rewarding work that has already been done.
Yeah.
Which applications have had outstanding design. I don't know how feasible that is, given how we contribute to those projects and make suggestions for those projects. But
I definitely think that competition, awards, is very important. It's not really about competition, it's about awarding or rewarding, recognising people. And I think that needs to be fixed through a proper design process. We don't know, we are sitting in a room speculating about what may or may not work and what tools may or may not be useful. And we do have a community out there, people we can survey. We can also survey some of the potential customers, as it were, and we can actually find out what we need to do. But yeah, I think recognition is a good word, and I think it's going to be very important, especially for that merit earning side of things. Anyway, are we done?
Mm-hmm.
Should we call it a day?
It's a day.
Paul, do you want to hear my wand that I bought? Do you want to hear it? Because the pen was annoying you, but I've got a much nicer sound that I can make. My magic wand. No? No, I can do it anyway because you're not paying attention. Alright then. Have a good evening, everybody.
Time for the pub.
I wish. But it were true.
You don't have a markup section.